want to be in old New Hampshire. I want to go.
Hello, this is Robert Cameron Weir, Chairman of the Publications Committee of the New Hampshire Society of Genealogists. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to you this morning about writing for the New Hampshire Genealogical Record, our genealogical journal. Just a few background facts about the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. It's been published initially from 1903 to 1910, and then we had just a bit hiatus and resumed publication in 1990. It's a 6x9-inch journal, printed as well as recently an enhanced digital version, a PDF version with additional content in it. We aim to have 3 to 4 issues per year, and it's currently being produced by a relatively small publications committee. There's me, our editor, Ruth Craig, and assistant editor, Margaret Hodges. Although it is a small journal, the New Hampshire Record has big visibility. For example, among the subscribers of the New Hampshire Genealogical Record, we have a pretty good assortment of large institutions, genealogical library, and large public libraries across the country. So if you write an article for the New Hampshire Genealogical Record, it's going to get out there. It's going to be seen by more than just the subscribers here in New Hampshire. It has pretty good visibility for a genealogical journal. So what do we publish? Well, obviously we publish genealogies, especially genealogies dealing with the state of New Hampshire and its colonial past. So we're looking for write-ups that are genealogical, not just biographical, but still providing context. We look for them to be in a format of a numbered descending genealogy, sometimes called register style. This is one where you start off with a specific ancestor and then trace, discuss his life, his spouse's life, list their children, discuss each of their children, and take it through as many generations as makes sense. Often 3 generations, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, depending on what material you have, would be a typical write-up here. We're also interested in case studies. Case studies are more in-depth, focusing on a challenging problem and how it was solved, and dealing with questions of identity or relationship. We're also interested in vital records transcriptions in abstracts. This could be transcriptions of information from an old cemetery in New Hampshire. It could be a town book, vital records, church records. We publish, overseers of the poor records, warnings out of town records, whatever vital records or interesting material you might find that would be of interest to genealogists studying New Hampshire families. Those can make good submissions. Book reviews. And also short, and by short I mean 1 page or less, items of interest that we would use as filler. And that would be used, for example, if we have an article that has an odd number of pages, we'd be left with a left-facing page that we need to put something on or leave it blank. So a submission of short filler material can work well in that context. So how do we on the publications committee score submissions we receive to decide which ones we're going to publish, which ones we're going to give more attention to, and which ones aren't a good fit? Well, we have a number of factors that would be pluses. These kind of would be good for the article in terms of its being eventually published in the New Hampshire Record. If it's well written, well formatted, well documented, well reasoned, obviously that's the ideal there. If it deals with early date families, all else being equal, we'd rather have an article that will be of interest to more subscribers than fewer subscribers. In an early date, say 1600s, 1700s, early 1800s, will tend to have more living descendants of that person and that family, therefore will be of broader interest. We also look for good examples of genealogical reasoning, especially clever or novel techniques, genealogies that use as part of the research are using newly uncovered or newly available records. We're very interested in genealogies of immigrant groups, Native American and African American genealogies. Also a match for a thematic issue. We have a schedule of thematic issues, and we'll get into that later. if your submission is a good match there, then that's a plus for an article. Negatives for an article would be, a big one would be, has the material already appeared in print previously? We generally do not accept articles that are either simultaneously submitted to other journals or have already been printed in other journals. If it's not in anything resembling register format, that would be a minus. If it has late dates, like 20th century dates, without any special pluses to justify the interest, then that would be a minus. But it could have a corresponding benefit. If something was, for example, using newly uncovered records from the early 20th century to solve a genealogical problem that occurred in the early 20th century, then that balances out. It's later dates, but it also has pluses because of its use of newly uncovered records. So none of these pluses and minuses are guarantees or kind of knockouts. These are all factors that go into making a decision. Another minus would be if it's too long. We can take an article, a submission, and serialize it over several issues of the journal if it makes sense. So we can do 30 pages now, 30 pages later, et cetera. But if it's extremely long, like we received a submission once of 500 pages, that's just not going to be feasible for us to serialize that over the next decade. For example, something like that would be more appropriate for a book. If the submission is only using secondary sources, not using any primary sources, that's going to be a minus. It's not probably exhibiting the best of what can be done with genealogical research if it's only using secondary sources like compiled genealogies. And in general, it's a minus if it requires too much effort to prepare the submission for publication. We have a limited staff, limited amount of time. We're going to go first with articles that are require less effort for us to whip them into shape for publication. In terms of kind of weighing the pluses and minuses, I'd ask you to maybe consider these two hypothetical articles that might be submitted to the New Hampshire Record. One, say, would be the title, John Smith of Ipswich, Massachusetts, and Dover, New Hampshire, 1635 to 1690, and some of his descendants. And another one might be George Alexandru of Thessaloniki, Greece, and Dover, New Hampshire, 1873 to 1925, and some of his descendants. One has earlier dates, the other has later dates, but deals with an immigrant group that we have not seen a lot of coverage in genealogical journals. So both of them have interest. In fact, either of these could be an excellent fit for the New Hampshire Record. So don't be put off by having late dates in your genealogy. Look for what some corresponding pluses that might exist as well. I'd like to take you through what it's like when an article is submitted, what you would expect as an author in terms of the process that will happen and the interactions you'll have with our editorial staff. Generally, you'll receive a quick acknowledgement of the submission, generally within a couple of days, just to say we received it and we'll be getting back to you. I'd say around 80% of the time we receive an article in at least what the author thinks is finished format, and maybe 20% of the time we receive a query, are you interested in an article this, or a draft asking for guidance. And I'd say we'd prefer the opportunity to offer feedback earlier. It's very rare for an article to come in and then go to publication without some pretty significant changes. So the earlier you come to us, the earlier we can kind of guide you along that direction. But of course, we're happy to receive whatever submissions you want to send. Just if you contact us earlier, it might be a little bit easier and require less rework. Once it's submitted and we acknowledge the receipt of the submission, the publications committee goes over it and rates it according to our subject matter guidelines. We'll have at least one, maybe two or more members of the publications committee will read through the article completely. We'll discuss it over email or at our regular publications committee meetings, and we'll rate it against our subject matter guidelines. For example, does it have more than a cursory connection to New Hampshire? If it doesn't, we're going to reject it right there. That's not something that's easily redeemable by the author. If you've done research on a family that was entirely, say, in Massachusetts, except in the third generation, one person came over and lived in New Hampshire, after he had all his children, he just retired to New Hampshire and died in New Hampshire, that's probably not enough of a connection to New Hampshire genealogy to warrant us taking a deeper look at it. So in some cases, if it fails our subject matter guidelines, we can reject it there. In some cases, however, we can suggest ways of reframing the piece, maybe concentrating on a specific person or a generation or a particular angle on the article. And if it's a reject, you'll typically know within a week or two if it doesn't meet our subject matter guidelines. Assuming it does meet our subject matter guidelines, then we get into the deeper editing. So it gets a thorough read through, and we're focusing on our genealogical in style guidelines. This typically, at this point, results in a list of questions and requests for the authors, things like adding missing citations. We require that every statement or assertion that's not of some generally known fact, requires a citation. So you don't have to say the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. You don't need a footnote for that. But if you say so-and-so was born in 1776, then we need a citation for that to some genealogical source to back that up. We may ask the author to beef up the argument, to say a few more words to maybe resolve what seems like a contradiction in the records, or to more explicitly, reason why they think so-and-so is the parent, or why so-and-so, the mother's maiden name is so-and-so. We might ask for the article to be restructured, to add maybe an introduction to guide the reader into it a little bit more. We may ask for extraneous information material to be removed if it doesn't really add to the overall flow of the article or to the argument. And generally, we're going to look at higher level concerns handled first, and then only do the detailed line editing once we've worked with the author on these higher level issues. And at this point, we'd also consider whether, based on the length of the article, whether it needs to be serialized across 2 or more issues, and we discuss kind of at what point in the article would we split them. Then we go into the detailed layout. So if not already done, we'd convert the article to our MS Word template, and we deal with the lower level details, typographical details, the correct use of N and M dashes. I'm handling what's called widows and orphans within the paragraphs, lines that go over onto another page just for 1 or 2 lines. We'd add the headers and footers as necessary. Production of line art for figures. Sometimes we'll get a submission of an article that has some sort of genealogical chart, a table, a tree, maybe a photograph, something like that. We need to get it ready for print, which may require some extra work. And that includes ensuring that any raster art, and by raster art, I mean photographs generally, that's available at a print resolution, 300 dots per inch, to give good quality in the printed journal. And then we're going to take a look in the next step at reviewing the rights and the permissions for the article. This is something the author might not have as much visibility on, but it's something we take seriously on the publications committee. And first step is to verify that we can publish all material that's quoted in the article. And we're going to pay specific attention to published works, quotations from published works since 1923, so still under copyright, or unpublished works that the author may have quoted from, like a diary or journal from an author's relative. And we're also going to make sure that we don't cause trouble, from a defamation standpoint for any living person, and also from a privacy identity theft concerns. So we're not going to print vital information, dates, for example, of living persons unless we have their explicit permission. And we're not going to say, Uncle Joe, if he's living, was a horse thief or something. We don't want to say anything that's potentially defamatory of a living person. And we're also going to ensure that we have a signed and dated contributor agreement from the author giving us permission to publish the article. Then once we have your article and every other submitter's article for that issue, then we do some work to combine them all into one file, ensure the correct pagination. Articles always start on the odd numbered page on the recto or the right facing page, bring in filler material if needed for articles with an odd number of page, add table of contents, the front matter, the editor's introduction, et cetera, to turn it into an actual journal rather than just a single article. There's a large process that happens on the production side as we're getting it print ready to send off to the printer, as well as trying to make an enhanced digital version to distribute electronically. There's an example of some of the steps that we have to go through. So if you're interested in submitting an article, I'd like to just give a few ideas of some what I call the fastest ways to print. The fastest way to get an article drafted and submitted to us to consider for the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. And obviously the easiest one is stuff you've already researched and written up and you just have kind of sitting around that might be dusted off and with not too much effort turned into a draft of an article. For example, you may have written up a family history of your own family and just privately circulated it in electronic form or a printout, or maybe even a privately printed book, so a small book within your family. And maybe some of that could be dusted off and turned into an article. If you've participated, as a professional genealogist or someone studying to be a professional genealogist in the ProGen study group, projects that are New Hampshire related from that study group have been successfully turned into articles. Client work that you've done for clients, with their permission, might be turned into an article. If you're going for certification with the BCG, portfolio items there, whether it's transcriptions, whether it's a case study, 3-generation genealogies there, those could also be turned into articles for the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. The caveat there is you should only send them to us after you've submitted them officially as part of your portfolio, because as part of the portfolio, you're not allowed to receive feedback from third parties on those articles. Well, if you submit it to us, we're certainly going to give you feedback. So you want to be able to say, I've already submitted it to the BCG, for their grading before you, talk to us about the article. So you remain in their good graces. In general, if it's already in the form of a case study or descending genealogy, it might be a good candidate for us. Second way, kind of fast way to get into print, idea number 2, is research you've already done, from whatever source, but if you haven't written it up yet, or it's just in a different format, like a client report or a computer database or something, but you've kind of done all the heavy lifting of the research and you've drawn conclusions, you just need to write it up in your word processor. That's another fast way to get it to print. And the third idea is, instead of the genealogy or case study, think of the record transcriptions or collections of abstracts. You can find previously unpublished record sets dealing with New Hampshire that have genealogical interest. Check with your local town hall, historical society, library, or church. There might be records there that they have just sitting in a closet someplace or in a filing cabinet that deserve to be seen, should be seen by a larger audience. One thing I like to do is keep your eyes open for what I call misplaced records. They might be archived in another area of the country, but still pertain to New Hampshire. For example, if there's a minister in 18th century New Hampshire, early 18th century New Hampshire, who did a bunch of baptisms, recorded them in his book, then decided to move to Ohio and died in Ohio, continued to work as a minister, his register of the baptisms he did might be in some local historical society in Ohio, but they have everything to do with New Hampshire. And we'd love to print those. So I like, whenever I see a new historical society's website where they have an online catalog, I like just searching for New Hampshire and see what they might have, because there are records that, like that these misplaced records that would be great to reunite them with New Hampshire genealogists. Even previously untranscribed manuscript records on Family Search could be interested. And don't forget, the short items, the curiosities, etc., for filler material, less than a page. Some good references that I'd like to draw to your attention as potential authors for the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. These are the books that we either use ourselves most often or refer our submitters to. The Guide to Genealogical Writing, Stratton and Hoff, tells you everything you need to do to write a descending genealogy in terms of the format, the structure, the conventions for that. It's an excellent book to have on your bookshelf if you're interested in writing journal articles. Mastering Genealogical Proof, that's every genealogist should understand that material, but it's especially useful for case studies to kind of how do you put together and structure a more complicated proof argument. That would be something you'd especially find in a case study. Evidence Explained, we all know, is the book that explains in great detail how to craft citations, which are essential in articles. Chicago Manual of Style in the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary 11th edition. Those are our standard reference books for matters of English usage and punctuation and spelling and hyphenation and things like that. Those are what I have on my bookshelf right here. And the Genealogist's Handbook for New England Research is great for confirming spelling of town names, counties, when one county broke off to form another county, when one town split off to daughter towns, etc. That detailed information it's a wonderful resource for confirming those types of facts. So for more information, if you're interested at all in learning more about writing for the New Hampshire Record, or talking to us about a possible submission, you can write to us at the Publications Committee at the email address there, NHSOG Publications @gmail.com. We also have further guidelines and a Microsoft Word template that you can download from our website, www.nhsog.org/the-New Hampshire-record. And also note that we have, as I mentioned earlier, some thematic issues that we've scheduled. We just came out with one on epidemics and infectious diseases. We're also looking at ones in the future coming up on French Canadian migrations to New Hampshire, Dover and Portsmouth coming up to their 400th anniversaries in 2023, African American New Hampshire genealogy, and Scots Irish in New Hampshire. Finally, I'll note that we're always looking out for a few good volunteers to add to the Publications Committee. Some of the things specifically that we look for are people with MS Word wizards, experts at Microsoft Word, eagle-eyed editorial assistants, genealogical documentation gurus, graphic designers, and those with Adobe InDesign skills. If you're at all interested in helping us out, contact us at the same email address, nhsogpublications@gmail.com, and we can discuss further. And I'd say that this is, you're helping us, but I'd say at the same time, you'll actually develop more and learn more about genealogical writing in the process and through the process of reviewing and correcting and editing, the submissions that we receive. It's one of those things, to become a better writer, sometimes it's the act of writing, but also editing makes you a better writer as well. As Yogi Berra said, you can observe a lot by just watching. So with that, I come to the end of this short presentation. I hope you will consider submitting your genealogies, case studies, book reviews, filler material, abstracts, transcriptions, etc. to the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. And if you're really enthusiastic, contact us about volunteering on the Publications Committee. Thanks.